Hi, everyone, and welcome to One Question with Pastor Adam. And hey, I'm Adam, and I am pastor to believers and doubters, to unfaithful Christians and faithful atheists. And Jesus was not afraid of questions, and neither are we here at One Question with Pastor Adam. And so we are going to tackle questions having to do with religion and Christianity and faith and science and what's happening in our culture. And there are big things happening in our culture you may have noticed the last week. And so one of those big topics was this document that was leaked from the Supreme Court about Roe versus Wade and a potential decision coming up. And that has us all talking. And Luke, what up, my man? Good to see you. So I have done from a religious pastoral perspective season 2, episode 17 on a progressive Christian response to abortion and ways in which we look at the Bible and find that the Bible actually doesn't say anything about the practice of abortion, despite the fact that abortion has been practiced from the beginning of human history. And in fact, the few places in the Bible where it looks like it's saying something about abortion, or the closest thing that we talk to about abortion, it says that the fetus is not a human life, it's property. So if you want more on that and a religious response to abortion from a progressive Christian perspective, please go check out season 2, episode 17. But today I wanted to bring in somebody who knows more about the law than I do. And so I was talking with one of my parishioners and friends at Clack He's done a lot of studying on this. I'll ask you to come on the show so that we can have a more informed education about what's happening. You get into these cultural crises, there's like people saying this and people saying that, and who do you trust? Well, I trust Alison, and so you can trust Alison too. And so I'm going to bring Alison in now. And hi, Alison. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Let's see. So Luke says abortion is a tool for equity and justice. So Luke, we're going to talk a lot more about that too. Hi, Rhonda. Good to see you. And Robin, good to see you too. So Alison, I was just kind of hoping that we could start off by thanking you for being here and sharing what you know about Roe versus Wade, and also just to start off by letting you introduce yourself to people who are watching and listening.
Yeah, well, I'm Alison. I am a former attorney. I am not an expert in reproductive justice or law, but I went to the University of Oregon Law School, and I paid very close attention when we went over the abortion case law and privacy case law in our con law classes. And it was really difficult and really surprising to a lot of my classmates, the way that the court went about creating a right to abortion. It has been very controversial from the very beginning. And so today I'd like to talk about the history of that case law, Roe v. Wade, Casey's subsequent things, and the rights that have been deriving from that. Then I'm going to talk about the process of drafting opinions in the Supreme Court and what that means about this draft that leaked. And then finally, I'm going to go over some of the sections of that draft opinion, talking about possible implications that those might have.
I love it. And so, friends, if you have comments or questions for Alison as we talk through this, feel free to put those in the chat section. This is so important for me, Alison, because I have no training in this, and I'm hearing all kinds of different things. Like Samuel Alito's document says that Roe versus Wade was based on faulty reasoning and things like that. And I don't know what to make of that. Like maybe he's right on that, and the Supreme Court should have figured this out in a different way, or maybe Congress should have figured this out in a different way. Maybe we're having to move towards Congress needing to figure this out in a different way than the Supreme Court. But there are just all kinds of things that I don't know. And so I'm just so grateful. And we're also grateful for you being here. Jessica says, so grateful for your voice today, Allison. So we are also grateful for you being here. So yeah, Allison sent me a message yesterday saying, this is what I'd like to talk about. And I was like, that's perfect. Let's do that. So Allison, wherever you want to start, feel free to go ahead.
Okay, I'm first going to start talking about the value of precedent. We follow a common law system where our decisions build on each other. And so when you have an important decision, particularly one addressing constitutional rights, a bunch of other things will derive from that. So if you go back and repeal that or change that, it's going to have a ripple effect on all of the other cases that were from that. And Roe v. Wade turns 50 next year. And so it has been the law of the land for a really long time. Most people grew up with a right to abortion. So next I'm going to start, rather than starting at Roe v. Wade, I'm going to go a few years earlier and talk about Griswold versus Connecticut in 1967. Griswold versus Connecticut ruled that married women have a right to contraception. And in doing so, the justices looked at the entirety of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and subsequent amendments and said, if you look at it as a whole, we can intuit that there is a right to privacy, that the government doesn't belong in people's bedrooms, it doesn't belong in family planning decisions, that if you look at the First, Fourth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments, there's a right to privacy, and that under that, married women can get contraceptions. About 6 years later, going back, so that's called a penumbra of rights. So a penumbra is a shadow. It's actually the edge of a shadow that's sort of gray and blurry. And so you've got the shadow of rights, which is right to free speech, freedom from search and seizure. But then you also have a penumbra of rights. And in that shadow of rights exists our right to privacy.
So the penumbra is it fair to say that the penumbra is kind of an interpretation of rights outside of what it literally, an amendment literally says?
It is. And so immediately people who follow originalism, which is we believe the text, we only look to the text and what the founders who wrote the text meant at the time. And that's difficult because we didn't have cars, we didn't have assault weapons, we didn't have birth control, we didn't have a lot of things. And so it's difficult, it can be very difficult to intuit intent in those situations. Yep. And so they looked at the whole of the document and went, a right to privacy exists a little bit everywhere in it, basically. So then 6 years later, Roe v. Wade came, and the court said, following on Casey and under the right to privacy and the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, there's a right to privacy and abortion falls under that. So we do have a constitutional right under the penumbra to abortion. However, in that case, they also said that the state has legitimate interests in and conflicting interests in regulating abortion. So while people have a right to privacy and determination, the state also has rights in health and safety, preservation of life. And so Roe v. Wade court said that they should weigh those interests. And rather than leaving it to the states or the legislature to delineate where those interests are, the court went on to develop the trimester framework that I think most of us are familiar with. You can have abortions without abridgment in the first trimester. In the second trimester, you can have abortions to preserve the life of the mother or if the fetus is not viable. And then in third trimester, the state can regulate abortions and prevent it. So that was Roe v. Wade. About 20 years later, Casey came out. And Casey actually chipped away at Roe v. Wade and has been the controlling law for the last 30 years now. And rather than making it an absolute right to abortion, They said that it was slightly less than that. And so under Roe v. Wade, abortion restrictions had to meet strict scrutiny, which is the hardest burden to overcome. The next highest would be an undue burden, and that was what Casey ruled. They said that the states can't impose an undue burden on the right to abortion, and then got rid of the trimester program and went with viability. The line was viability. If after viability, you can't do an abortion, and before that. But because they changed the scrutiny level to undue burden, it opened the door to a lot of lawsuits that started chipping away at our right to abortion. We now can have a 24-hour wait. We can require that it be done by that you get a doctor to look into it. I can't really get into it, but it also ruled that there were some things that were undue burdens, like requiring parental consent for a minor to get an abortion. That's an undue burden because it would prohibit people from exercising that right. Any other questions before I move on to the rights that derive from this theory of case law?
I think keep going. We do have a lot of comments and questions, but maybe we can get to those afterwards, and they might be coming back to some things that you've said. But let's just keep going.
So, based on this penumbra of privacy, any right that you can think of that's based on privacy is based off of that theory from Griswold in Connecticut. In the Dobbs opinion, which I'm going to call the draft opinion that overturns Roe v. Wade, they explicitly overturn Roe and Casey, but they don't really talk about Griswold. So, but the rights that we have stemming from this law include anti-miscegenation, the Black and white people can marry, that case law stems from it. Right to birth control for unmarried people stems from that. The right to gay marriage also stems from it. The right to conduct consensual sexual acts in the privacy of your own home. Those all stem from it. Lawrence v. Texas turned over a law banning sodomy in 2005. And then we didn't get the right to gay marriage until 2015. So these are fairly recent and fairly substantial laws that we now rely on.
Yeah, Amber's asking this very question. I'm curious if the conversations about other laws being hinged on the 14th Amendment making cases on birth control and gay marriage getting overturned, potentially because of Roe versus Wade getting overturned. Can you talk a little bit about the 14th Amendment and what that means and how that's used in this case?
I can. The 14th Amendment, I wish I had reread it before this. Bummer on me, I guess.
Okay.
So the 14th Amendment is the Due Process Clause, and it incorporates the rights that are preserved under the Bill of Rights to the states. Before, it was just the federal government can't infringe on these rights. But now, with the 14th Amendment, it also means state governments can't infringe on these fundamental rights. Some of those fundamental rights weren't determined to be fundamental until a century and a half after the 14th Amendment. And since they intuited that the penumbra of privacy applies to states through the 14th Amendment. So when Roe was decided, there were concurrences by the other justices, one of whom said, hinging this on the 14th Amendment is sort of a slippery slope, and the penumbra of privacy, I think it should just be hinged on the 9th Amendment that says anything that isn't written here is reserved to people. I think that probably would have been a stronger argument, as we're about to see, because Alito then slashes all of those understandings and gets rid of a lot of our rights in his decision.
Wow.
So before we go on to how Alito approached this issue, I'm going to talk about the process that leads to opinions in the Supreme Court. I'm sure some of you have heard, oh my God, a leak from the Supreme Court, that's totally unprecedented. And while it isn't unprecedented, it is bad and very, very unusual. Ironically, the last time an opinion was leaked was Roe v. Wade. So it's interesting that he kind of conveniently forgot about that.
The last time it was leaked was in the 1970s, whenever they did Roe versus Wade.
But Roe v. Wade was leaked later. This is a very early leak. So we had oral arguments in December. Following oral arguments, the justices confer and they take a preliminary vote. Then whoever the most senior justice is will assign who writes the opinion. They'll draft this opinion, and then they circulate it around the court. and people can decide whether they're going to sign on to that opinion. They might draft their own concurrences, and people might change their votes. So a concurrence might end up being the majority opinion. And there's also a lot of politicking and lobbying that goes on backstage. So this Alito draft is basically the most extreme overturning of Roe v. Wade that I could imagine. It is an extremely extreme position, and he could have gone about it in many more delicate ways. And so the rumor is this was Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision, with a lot of Republican appointees agreeing that we have a right to abortion. So we've sort of done a 180. Rumor is that this was a 5-4 vote, so very, very close, and that Roberts actually didn't vote with the conservatives. So what would be happening is generally the first draft will get circulated, and then the other justices will be like, I can't sign my name onto this. Why don't we remove this part, or we insert this part, and then you can have my vote. Otherwise, I'm going to write a concurrence, and nobody likes plurality opinions. And then they fine tune it, and then they drop the finished opinion. And we're not supposed to be able to see any of this. It's like making sausage for the legislature, but even more like mysterious. You don't know what happens. It just magically comes. So the draft was circulated in February. And I guess I'm not going to go into my theories about who leaked it and why, but this was circulated in February. It was only just now leaked at the time when there's probably a lot of politicking going on about what should be included and what shouldn't be in the decision. And I think since it leaked, if they now made any changes to it, it would reveal internal politics, the lines that certain justices have on this issue. And it just has a lot of implications. And so now that this is leaked, I think it's less likely that this is going to be watered down or that a concurrence is going to come in. So I have some pretty serious concerns about this. So keeping in mind that this is a draft opinion, abortion is still legal federally, except that they didn't except in Texas, where they, for some reason, didn't put an injunction on this law they're doing. So it could change. People could change their votes. It could be watered down. So I'm just going to do the analysis based on the February text that they dropped. Awesome. So some of this might change. We're going to have to wait till it comes out, which should be before the end of June.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we've all heard the theories that maybe it was a liberal who leaked it or a conservative who leaked it, and all the justifications for one of them maybe doing it. So, but I would love to hear your analysis of parts of the leak.
Leaking it will also absolutely torpedo a clerk's legal career. So it was either someone who thought that this would not torpedo their career, someone who doesn't have a legal career at risk, or they thought that, or they didn't care. It was so important to them that they leaked it.
Do you also worry that this hurts the legitimacy of the Supreme Court?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Although the legitimacy of the Supreme Court has been on precarious ground for quite a while.
True. This is true. Yeah.
All right. So the opinion. The opinion explicitly overrules Roe v. Wade and Casey, and says that they will return the question of abortion to the people's representatives. Before I go into that, let me just talk about how 26 states explicitly asked the court to overturn Roe v. Wade in their amicus briefs, and that these 26 states will already have a ban in place, or will have a ban if Roe falls, and we only have 16 states that affirmatively protect the right to abortion. And this is despite the fact that 72% of the country doesn't support overturning Roe. No state has more than 30% of the population that supports overturning Roe. But if Roe's overturned, 58% of women in reproductive age are going to live in a state where they can't get an abortion. So there are very, very important implications and rights riding on this decision. So he sort of takes an originalist perspective. He says that the Constitution, much like the Bible, doesn't mention abortion anywhere. And when you are looking for rights that aren't explicitly enumerated in the Constitution, Alito says that the court must look to the history, it must be deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition, and implicitly in the concept of ordered liberty. That's a quote. And so he then goes on to a long, long analysis about how abortion has always been criminalized and it's never been accepted anywhere. And I think he's wrong about that. He's a little disingenuous in his historical analysis, because even he admits that under American law by states, before we had a right to abortion, abortion was permitted until the quickening of the fetus and then was prohibited after that. But he says that it's always been criminalized forever, everywhere. But says because it isn't deeply enshrined in our nation's history and explicitly in the Constitution, that there is no right to an abortion. And he says the remedy for that is that if we want a right to privacy, we pass a constitutional amendment guaranteeing it, which I think we should do.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there. But if not, then it's just an issue left to the states. He goes on to note all of the rights that we now have descending from this. He lists a long list. I went over them before. Interracial marriage, gay marriage, all of those. And he says that, don't worry, even though the analysis that I just did definitely applies to all of those rights, we're not going to overturn those other rights. Those are safe because those rights don't have the weighing factor of protecting life. No one dies if gay people get married. And so the competing state interests aren't as big. Although there's nothing, if you just follow his logic about rights that we have and rights that we don't, all of those fall. And as my husband pointed out, don't worry, the court won't touch these rights is dicta. It's non-binding.
Yeah.
Other courts could come on and say, well, he said we wouldn't, but we've been convinced by his analysis that there is no right to privacy. And so all of these should be left to the state. He also calls the viability line arbitrary because a baby can live at 24 weeks if it's born in the city, but if it's born rural, it's closer to 28 weeks. And when we didn't know about the viability line, it would have been okay to abort those fetuses, but now it wouldn't have been, and constitutional rights shouldn't be that squishy. And remember, I said at first it was strict scrutiny, and then it was states can't impose an undue burden. He changes it now to just rational basis review. If the state has a rational basis for passing the law and limiting abortion, they can do that, and the law stands. It's very easy to overcome this hurdle, and he explicitly lists a number of things that he would consider a rational basis for the state to limit abortion on. I will read these to you.
Good. I was going to ask, what does that even mean?
Now, a rational basis review. Law regulating abortion is entitled to a quote-unquote strong presumption of validity. It must be sustained if there's a rational basis on which the legislature could have served legitimate state interests, such as for and preservation of prenatal life at all stages of development, the protection of maternal health and safety, the elimination of particularly gruesome or barbaric medical procedures, the preservation of the integrity of the medical profession, and mitigation of fetal pain, and the prevention of discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or disability. He says if a state passes a law under any of those reasons, courts must uphold it as valid.
Okay.
Yay, happy times.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Luke says, you're getting to this. Luke says abortion itself is enough for this to be a crisis, but it's even scarier that this will impact swaths and swaths of other civil rights. So here we are. Yeah. Joe, thank you for sitting here in the UK trying to be supportive. So Jessica says, not for nothing, I would love to hear more on your theories on why this was leaked and we're hearing about it now. You don't have to go into that if you don't want to.
I can. It can be pretty quick. So
okay, go for it.
This was leaked recently. They wasn't like Politico sat on it for 2 months. It was leaked recently. They just got it. I suspect a conservative probably leaked it for the reasons that I said before. Now, if they change any of it, I suspect behind the scenes they were going to change some of this. Maybe keep heightened standard of review rather than rational basis. Maybe not do something that jeopardizes all of the rights stemming from privacy. But now, since this got leaked, it's going to be much more difficult to change this and then publish the opinion later. And so And if a liberal had leaked it, I suspect they would have leaked it back in February when they read it, because for a liberal to leak it would be like, oh gosh, I'm very upset about this and concerned. Let's put this out there. The fact that it came out now, when I know that they're probably tweaking the opinion, makes me think that someone wanted it to stay in this exact form.
Jessica says it's crazy that the quickening would ever be used since it varies and you would have to go to self-report.
Well, the quickening line was before we had medicine.
Okay.
So people might not even know they're pregnant until
Right.
the quickening. I mean, that was when we didn't know about trimesters or how any of that worked. So the quickening law is at common law.
Yep. Rhonda Newell brings up the Bible and that abortion is in the Bible several times. There's a passage in Exodus 21 where if two men are in a fight and one of them hits a woman who's pregnant and it has a miscarriage, then the fetus is treated as property, not as a life. But if the woman dies, then life for a life. So the Bible, when it talks about things that are close to abortion, what we would consider abortion, Numbers chapter 5 has something similar. It always treats the potential fetus, as property and not as a human life. So that's actually one of the reasons that the Southern Baptist Convention back in the 1970s supported Roe versus Wade for the first decade of Roe versus Wade. So there's a little bit of Bible in there too. So thanks for bringing that up, Rhonda. It's good. Allison, what else? What else?
That was all I had, but I can answer questions if people have.
Let's see. So, friends, if you've got questions in here, we can bring them up. Let's see. Dina says, "Welcome to the Handmaiden's Tale." Is that feeling? Yeah, that's feeling like that for you, Allison.
A little bit. Yeah. I do have the quote that Alito said to perhaps comfort people about how this should not be applied to other rights. We emphasize that our decision concerns the constitutional right to abortion and no other right. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt on precedents that do not concern abortion. Though, I mean, they were decided on the same basis. So, I mean, it's like, don't look at what I'm doing. Listen to what I'm saying. He's doing a little bit of that in this.
Tisha, I think, says, so then rationally, if someone were to abort to save their own life, then that can be illegal because they are choosing a life or they're aborting a child. I think a state could potentially go there, right?
Yeah. The state, that would depend on how the state drafts the law.
Yeah. So a state could say that if let's take extreme conservative Christian viewpoint, that under no circumstances should you ever have an abortion, then the woman could not get an abortion, even if it meant saving her own life. They're also making it so that, if a 14-year-old girl is raped by her uncle or whomever, she's going to have to carry that child all the way through. I mean, this is like the most extreme craziness. Amber says, apparently I'm tired. I was trying to say if one of these laws can fall, then so can all of the other ones. Yeah, that's one of the big dangers. Melanie says it could be that a Democrat leaked it to try to rally the base at the midterms.
But the midterms aren't until later. I mean, we would have rallied the base regardless, even if this came out in June.
Yeah. But either way, Melanie, we need to rally the base. I mean, this is what conservatives have been doing for so long, is emphasizing the Supreme Court and getting Republicans to be one-issue voters, and Democrats have utterly failed in recognizing the importance of the Supreme Court. And so here we are, right? Let's see. Yeah. So I'm not seeing very many questions or anything, just a lot of really good comments. So, David says, my fear, let's see, David, I'm trying to find my fear in this is that this will set a precedence for more changes. Like everybody's just afraid of this slippery slope, that this may bring more rights lost, makes me want immigrate out of this country. How are you feeling? I've read some folks who are like, we just need to redo the Constitution. Like it was written for a different time. It still refers to Native Americans as savages, right? Still refers to African Americans as 3/5 and slaves. How do you feel about throwing the whole thing out and starting over? Or
this is difficult for me because I spent my career as a lawyer and I was a government major. I worked with state legislatures. I worked on political campaigns. So I've sort of dedicated my whole life in education to studying the Constitution and our rights and our government. All I've been praying, it seems that our republic is in trouble.
Yeah.
And all I've been able to pray is that whatever comes next is better, that we use this as a growth opportunity to improve ourselves. And whether that means adding some amendments to the Constitution or completely redoing our form of government, I feel like something is coming along those lines.
Yeah. Catherine makes a great point. Mind you, the change in law will not prevent relatively wealthy women from traveling for an abortion, regardless of the Christian anti-abortion stance. Catherine, I think this is one of the key points, because when you criminalize abortion, you are basically criminalizing poor women. This is an attack against poor women, and who are going to be criminalized for this. And those who are more wealthy, as Catherine says, will be able to travel to wherever they want to go, wherever they can go to get this procedure. And poor women are going to have to, if they do this, are going to do it in very dangerous ways. And so that's another, Catherine, thank you for that. Any thoughts on that, Alison?
Yeah, Canada has said that they will welcome American women to come in for abortions, but it costs a lot of money to go to Canada on vacation. So that's really different. I read a statistic that showed a map of where abortion would be allowed and not allowed after this decision, and they calculated that it would affect about 80,000 women a year who would get abortions but otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. And so that includes the people in those states that can travel to states. Oregon is one of the states that has abortion protected. However, if you live on the eastern side of the state, they've been going to Idaho to get their abortions because it's closer. And now if we ban that, the people in Eastern Oregon are going to have a really difficult time accessing abortions despite living in a state where it will still be legal. So all of our laws affect people with resources differently than people without resources. And it's one of the bad aspects of our system.
Yeah. Susan says, is it at all likely that Clarence Thomas will resign? And if so, what impact might that have?
No, I don't think. No, he's not going to resign. And I don't really know how we can, what mechanisms there are. You can't really impeach a Supreme Court justice. But he is extraordinarily problematic.
I've been hearing a lot that there is no ethical code for Supreme Court justices. What does that mean? Like, that just seems so weird to me.
Yeah, we give them lifetime appointments, and so there's with no way out. And so there are ethics. They are bound by legal ethics, but they're the ones that enforce legal ethics. So yeah, that's why confirmation is so important. You really need to be confirming people who believe in the system and are deeply ethical. And we haven't been doing that.
Because there's all that talk about how Clarence Thomas's wife is all into these silly conspiracy theory, like January 6th and all these things. And he's voting on those things.
I have no reason to believe this, but I would not be surprised if Ginny Thomas was the one who leaked this.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting.
Yes, no.
Yeah, there you go. Jessica says, Alison, your informed and hopeful outlook is so appreciated. Thank you.
I work on it.
Yes, we all got to work on it. So Wendy says exactly why it's so important to vote blue, no matter who. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. I'm with you. We got to get out and do that. Okay. Let's see. I think those might be all of our comments and questions. Anything else, Allison, that you want to bring up?
Well, first trimester abortions have generally been allowed under the viability and thing, but this decision is going to leave that up to the states. And if a state wants to ban abortion completely at 0 weeks, they would be able to do that.
Yep. We've got a question. Do you think that Oregon is vulnerable to losing? And I think you just answered it. Well, sort of answered it. But how do you feel about Oregon and our vulnerability in this?
Generally, the population of Oregon is very liberal, and if the system works correctly, they will remain in power. However, the Republicans have been very good at gerrymandering and maybe calling elections into question, and I would not say Oregon is immune to those Republican tricks.
There are a lot of Republican tricks, including, as we've been saying, like we got to get out and vote, and voter suppression is a big Republican trick too. So God, Jessica said you're very hopeful, and that's very inspiring and important. What leads you to be hopeful?
I feel better when I'm hopeful than when I'm despondent.
Yeah.
So self-care.
Yes.
For me, self-care is talking myself. My dad is also very, very like, oh, well, don't worry, we can do X, Y, and Z. And this is going to turn out for the best because of ABC. And so when I am having trouble maintaining my outlook, I say, Daddy, what would you say about this? And then I usually feel better afterwards. If I ever call him, he's like, we're fucked. I'm going to be in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So David says, I'm happy. Here's another reason to be hopeful. David says, I'm so happy I've found a group of people that are of faith, but also use their damn brain. So we're moving into cuss words, which is always fun here on One Question with Pastor Adam. And Patty says, make calls for the primary in 2022. Luke affirms self-care and community. So Georgia says, thank you. April says, I live in Canada and we still need to vote. Absolutely. And Patty says, I love your dad's response. I love your dad's response too. And I love your responses. Thank you, Allison, for being here and helping guide us through the complications of Roe versus Wade and whatever is going to come up into the future. It has been so helpful for me and for all of us. So thank you so much for being here, Allison.
My pleasure to be here. And great questions, everyone. I really appreciate them.
Awesome. So friends, we will be here. David, it's okay. We like language here on One Question. We like the French. It's all good. It's all good, David. So friends, we will do this again next Thursday at 11 o'clock Pacific. You can check out all of the episodes of One Question with Pastor Adam on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you for being here. Todd, grateful for the insight. We are all grateful for the insight. Thank you, Allison, once again. And friends, until next week, God be with you.
And also with you.